Hi, I'm Marie Elizabeth Mali, and this is Relationship Alchemy. Today, we are talking about Ruthless Compassion with Dr. Marcia Sirota. Marcia Sirota is a board-certified psychiatrist practicing in Toronto, Canada. She has more than 25 years of mental health experience and specializes in wellness, healing trauma, unblocking creativity, and supporting people to become their best selves. She's the founder of the Ruthless Compassion Institute, which promotes empowerment and self-awareness. She is a podcaster and has done me the honor of having me be on her podcast, which is awesome. So I think we'll link into that for the show notes as well. She's the author of 5 books and instructor of several online courses. Her most recent book is Be Kind, Not Nice: How to Stop People Pleasing, Build Your Confidence, and Discover Your Authentic Self, which is a topic totally after my own heart. Welcome to the show, Dr. Marcia.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Marie Elizabeth. It's really a pleasure to be here today.
Thank you. So I ever since we first met, I have just been in love with this idea of ruthless compassion. And as we were chatting, you said, yeah, well, this is really applicable in relationships. And I would love for you first to unpack what you mean by ruthless compassion. And then let's talk about how it can be of use to people in their relationships.
For sure. So in a very simplistic way, you can think of it as tough love, but it's much more than that, because ruthless compassion is very much like a yin yang proposition. You know, there's the ruthless part, which is really about, it's not about cruelty. It's about being strong, being tough, and really going for honesty and clarity and having good boundaries and setting good limits and not pandering, not placating, definitely not people pleasing. And then the compassion piece is about love and kindness, opening your heart, being sensitive, accepting, tolerant, non-judgmental, and flexible emotionally and mentally. But see, the problem lies when you have one or the other. When you're too ruthless, you're just a hard ass. If you're too compassionate, you're a pushover. So when you bring the two together, the ruthless part helps the compassionate not be too much of a wuss, and the compassion part helps the ruthless part be not too tough and, you know, verging on harsh.
Not too much of a dick.
Exactly. So the combo, like, it's like that, you know, nice yin yang, so that it really balances. One balances the other. And that's why I think it's applicable to relationship, because I think a lot of times in relationship, especially women, we tend to go to either one side or the other. Let's say we've been hurt and we might get too harsh because we're fearful of being hurt, or, you know, maybe we didn't get enough love growing up, so we tend to people please in order to, because we think that's the only way to get love. And so, you know, we get taken advantage of, we end up like doormats. So we can go to both extremes. And what we need to do is find that happy place in the middle where we're both kind and strong. And that way we can have healthy relationships.
I love that. And what kept coming to mind as you were speaking was the word discernment or discerning. And it feels to me like that ability to be both kind and firm, not nice, not people pleasing, but also not harsh, that there's a fair amount of discernment involved in that. Would you just say a word about discernment?
I love that word. You know, it's not a word I've used, but I love the word distinctions, which is kind of the same thing. I love to make distinctions. So, like, for example, in my book, Be Kind, Not Nice, I'm talking about how being nice is thinking about how you can make the other person happy exclusively to the detriment of your own self-care. Whereas being kind is thinking about how you can be good to yourself and to others. So kind goes both ways, nice only goes out. So that's why I said be kind, not nice, because you want to consider your own needs and feelings as much as you consider others. Because if you neglect yourself, then what happens is you can get into codependency where you expect the other person to take care of you. Maybe they expect you to take care of them. And codependency ultimately fosters mutual resentment because neither party get their needs met. So if you have that discernment, or are able to make that distinction between kind and nice, you're able to understand that if you take responsibility for your own self-care and you don't expect your partner to be your emotional caretaker, rather they can just be your partner, then you have much more likelihood of a successful and fulfilling relationship.
Amen. How would you suggest someone, let's start from the harsh side. Let's say someone has been hurt and they've developed this harsh exterior, which you and I both know is a form of self-protection, really. What would be the first step you'd recommend somebody undertake to begin to soften that and find the compassion piece?
So ruthless compassion is about seeing the truth, but never beating yourself up for what you see. So it always starts with that self-acceptance and self-discovery. So if you recognize, wow, I've been hurt, I've grown this hard shell around me, I'm not letting people in, I'm not letting them see my soft, tender, vulnerable core, and I'm maybe making them feel pushed away or intimidated. This is something I need to change. Not I'm stupid for doing this, not I'm bad for doing this, but this is not working for me in my pursuit of love and relationships. So I need to change this if I want to get my needs met in relationships. So it's about recognizing without judgment, without criticism, and then making a decision to change. And I think the best thing to do when you're feeling fearful is to develop self-trust. And self-trust comes from looking back at your past experiences and seeing, wow, I've handled this well, I've dealt with that challenge well, I've coped with this stress well. And if you give yourself credit for all of your accomplishments, especially when they have to do with relationships or things that are having to do with emotions and struggles, then you can build that confidence, and that helps you have self-trust. And when you have self-trust, you trust that you will be okay. I'm going to be okay regardless of what happens. If this person ends up to be a disappointment, I'm going to be okay. If they abandon me or reject me, I'm going to be okay because I trust myself to take care of myself, and also because I love myself and I am enough. So the person is a complement. They are not fulfilling or filling any kind of holes in me. They are simply complementing me. I'm a full person, they're a full person, and we complement each other, as opposed to I'm a half empty person and they're going to fill me up. So if I
You
trust
complete
myself,
me, as the
that's
movie
right.
says, the most
And that's a
codependent
problem.
statement ever.
I know rom-coms are so dangerous
The
because they give
worst.
us this completely distorted view of what relationships should be, that the person shouldn't complete us, they should complement us, you know? So absolutely. So I love that you bring up the rom-com, because it's a scourge in terms of our relationships, because things that are touted as positives in rom-coms are actually negatives, like you complete me, or this person who's stalking someone, and that's seen as like romantic pursuit, but it's actually psychopathic stalking, you know? So
Amen.
we should not be looking to rom-coms for our relationship modeling at all. But yeah, so I would say self-trust, to make a short story long.
Yeah, that beautifully said. I love how you spooled that out. So, and for the person who tends toward the people-pleasing side and who's sort of engrossed in a kind of over compassion, not the clean form of compassion, but the more compensatory and kind of trying to get the love needs met type of compassion, what would you recommend as a first step for that person to shore up their strength?
Yeah. So like I was saying, feeling like you're enough. So recognizing that whatever happened to you as a child that made you feel like you were not enough, know that the things that happened to you were never about you. They were about the people who did it to you. So if it was your parents, your guardians, your coaches, your teachers, whoever, your peers in school, whoever made you feel like you were not enough, those people were doing it because of their own issues. And it was never about you. You have been enough since birth. You've always been enough. And all you need to do is recognize that. So doing some really very conscientious affirmations. I am enough. I am perfectly imperfect. I am good enough. I don't have to be better. And I am lovable just the way I am. So if you work on just affirming that you are enough, and also recognizing a fundamental truth, and I tell this to all my patients, which is that love is something that is given freely or not at all. So if you are trying to ingratiate yourself to someone or placate someone or please someone, whatever is coming back is not love. It's probably some kind of self-interest on their part. They think they're going to get something from you. Love is given freely or not at all. So if somebody needs something from you in order to give you attention, what they're giving you is not love. If they are loving you freely, then you can trust that it's love. So people pleasing never works, because what you're getting back from your pleasing is never love. You're being taken advantage of, you're being exploited, you're being used, maybe misused, maybe abused, but you're not getting love. If people love you, they love you just because.
I'm so glad you said that. And I'd really like to go down that thread a little bit more, because when love is conditional, like what you're describing, and as it is for so many of us as kids with parents, I mean, sure, there's a baseline of love, but it's also like you get a lot more approval when you get good grades, right? So then the perfectionism and that whole thing kind of ramps up. But as adults, what's that?
The
performing, right? We're taught as children that we have to perform to get love. I really think most of us internalize that we have to perform, we have to be good, we have to excel. And so undoing that is in our adult relationships is a whole thing.
Yeah.
Would you speak to that?
Sure. I think that our whole society sets us up to feel that way, right? That we have to always be better, do better, and that love is something conditional. But I always say that the condition for love is that there should be mutual respect and kindness, that it shouldn't be about pleasing. There is condition for love. Love shouldn't be unconditional when you're between two adults, maybe a parent to a child, but two adults, there should be a condition of mutual respect, mutual kindness and courtesy, mutual consideration. That should be the baseline condition. But other than that, pleasing should not be in the equation. So we need to relearn that the condition should be about kindness, respect, courtesy. It shouldn't be about pleasing, doing for, rescuing, placating. It shouldn't be anything like that. It should be simply, I'm here, love me, don't love me. You're here, I either love you, I don't love you. Nobody can force it. Nobody can coerce it. Nobody can manipulate for it. It's either going to happen or it's not. And if it happens, work with it, build it, develop it. And if it doesn't happen, be disappointed, grieve your loss, and move on, let go, because you're not going to get it by, scrambling. It's not going to happen if you try to force it, because it's not going to be love. Like I said before, it's not going to be love. So if we understand that you're enough and they're going to love you if they love you, and if it's something else that you do, it's not love. So let it go and have that equanimity and trust that if they don't love you, it's not because there's something lacking in you.
I think that's the key right there, because there's such a temptation, I think, to make it mean something about us. And I want to totally reinforce what you said. As you were talking, I was seeing a pretzel in my mind, like the way people can tend to pretzel themselves in a relationship to try to become the shape that will be acceptable to the person, right? And then you've lost yourself. And at some point, some part of you is like, this isn't working. I'm tired of the pretzel.
Doesn't make you happy.
No.
If you're not being honest and authentic, the relationship is false and you're not going to be happy. You're not going to be fulfilled. You'll have a relationship, but it will be empty and you'll be frustrated. And I think that's why so many people act out in their relationships, because they're not being authentic. They think they have to change who they are to keep the partner. And maybe they don't actually, but they're doing it because that's their belief. And so they're miserable. And so they're cheating, or they're drinking, or they're drugging, or they're behaving badly to their partner because they're not being authentic. And so what they need to recognize is that the only relationship worth having is one where you're being authentic. Otherwise, A, you're working way too hard, and B, you're not going to be happy.
I just love your clear-eyed, no nonsense approach. It just feels so good to my system. It's like, whew.
I wanted to add actually one quick thing apropos what we were talking about. The other thing I think is a big problem in relationships is that people have this panic about being alone.
Yeah.
They get freaked out. I can't be alone. I have seen so many women stay in bad relationships and they've told me, I'm afraid to be alone. And so one of the things that I think we need to build is that trust in our own capacity to be happy on our own with our friends, with our family. It's not that we're going to be completely alone, but not in a romantic relationship in that moment. If we can trust that we can be okay and happy and have a good, fulfilling life when we're not in a relationship, that actually makes it much more possible to be in a relationship, because we're not desperate and we're not clinging to a bad one so that we can't leave the bad one and get into a good one.
Yeah, it's kind of a prerequisite to actually have a healthy relationship, is to recognize I'd be okay without this. I mean, if Patrick disappeared tomorrow, I would be sad. I would miss him. There'd be a huge empty space where a very important person was in my life. But I have a baseline of self-trust. Like, I know I could be okay, and the same is true for him. And when you live in that space, then you can have real choice. about being together. Say a word about the power of actually being together with choice.
Okay, so I always tell my patients that when you're in a relationship, you wake up every morning and you look at your partner, you go, okay, today I choose to continue to be with you, right? It's like, it's an active choice that you make every day of your relationship. It's not a default. It's not this unconscious thing. You have to look at your partner and go, yep, today I deliberately choose to be with you. It's not that we're just sharing the same bed and it's easy to just carry on. No, I actively choose because I actively want to be with you because of the things that we have together. And if I don't actively choose to be with you, I have to consider, what is the problem? Is it something we can work on? Or is it something that I've been ignoring that is too big and really is a deal breaker? So if we're not actively choosing, we can just be unconscious and drifting. And that's a stagnant relationship as opposed to a healthy one.
Beautiful. So back to ruthless compassion. I want to ask more. Is this something that people you find cultivate best alone or best in connection with others or both? How do you develop that ruthlessness that's not too hard?
I think you can develop it whatever way you want. And I think developing it in a relationship could be something really fun because it's something you can practice together. And, the thing you need to understand is whether you're doing it alone or in a relationship, that it's a process. So you're learning. So you're going to sometimes swing to one extreme. Sometimes you're going to swing to the other extreme. And you have to be patient with yourself and each other. And, again, have that compassion. So you're not judging or criticizing yourself as you're learning this new tool. And have a sense of humor, about yourself, about your partner, if you're doing it as a couple, and, not take yourselves too seriously, but recognize that it's a practice that you have to cultivate, like a meditation practice or a martial arts practice or practicing a musical instrument, any kind of a practice. You have to work at it and you have to make mistakes and learn from your mistakes. And you don't have to get bent out of shape if you go too far in one extreme or the other. So for sure, I think it would be fun to practice it as a couple, but you can do it on your own. And it's really about building that attitude of, I want to see the truth. I want to be awake and conscious and see the truth about myself, other people, and the world. And then I also want to have that attitude of understanding, tolerance, acceptance, but not lenience, right? You don't want lenience. You don't want to have this get out of jail free card. I can do any bad thing in the world because I love myself and accept myself. No, that's not okay, right?
That's called adolescence. That's not adulthood.
Or sociopathy,
or
right?
sociopathy,
Yeah.
exactly.
They're similar, right?
There can be correlation.
Right. So you have to have that compassion without lenience, and you have to have that rigorous honesty without, this rigidity, this dogmatism, this fanaticism. No fanaticism
or self-flagellation.
Yeah, none of that stuff. So it's, again, balance, right? That middle road that all the spiritual paths talk about, the middle road, balance. So, looking at the truth about yourself, others, in the world, having that attitude of loving kindness, compassion, acceptance, tolerance, understanding, forgiveness, but not lenience. And if you keep working on that and you know that you're going to make mistakes, you're going to mess up, you're going to go to one extreme, you're going to go to the other, you're going to blow it. It's okay. We're on a journey. It's a process. That's life. And it's not about not making mistakes. It's about using your mistakes as important learning opportunities. Because I'm sure with you, it's the same as with me. Some of my best learning opportunities have been when I've blown it. And then because there's some pain involved, right? And that pain
that's the motivator.
Really yeah, exactly. It glues that understanding in your brain. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. And I'm still noodling on this idea of seeing the truth in myself, others, in the world. Is it possible without having someone else sort of checking to say a therapist or a coach or some, trusted advisor or whatever? How do you find the spot where the truth that you're seeing is the actual truth and not a delusion based on your past patterning?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And I'm so glad you asked it, because sometimes it's really hard to make that distinction, to have that discernment, what is real and what is not. And in this sort of post-truth world where there's so much online that's not real, that's conspiracy theory, that's opinion versus fact, that's, crazy stuff versus fact. It's harder and harder these days to know what's real and what's fantasy, what's illusion, what's delusion, what's propaganda. And I think that sometimes we really do need one or two wise guides who we can trust, who we can always go back to, whether it's a coach, a therapist, a clergy person, a family member, a wise friend, an elder, whoever it is that we can go to and say, I just need to run something by you. Because we can get into a box, even if it's not a delusion, we can get into these boxes of thinking and think that there's something that's real when it's not. And these people can help us think outside that box that we form. We can open up that perspective and see a bigger picture and gain that understanding of that truth. So I would say that sometimes it is hard on your own. And it's, I think, always advisable if you're trying to find the truth to have trusted guides. But of course, they have to be trusted. And one of the best ways to have a guide that you can trust is to look at the life they're living. If their life is a shambles, maybe not the best guide to trust. Look at the way they're going through their lives. If they're happy, if they're well adjusted, if they're kind, if they're clear, if they have good boundaries, if they're respectful and respected, if they are doing well, they don't have to be doing perfectly because there's no perfect, but if they're doing well and they are, they have good people around them and they're doing good in the world, then I would say this is probably a good respected guide that you can follow. If their lives are chaotic, if they're in crisis, if they're, saying something but not doing it, right? If they're not living the message, then they're probably not a respected guide. So that's a good way to know who to go to for your life coaching or counsels when you're trying to see the truth about things and gain that ruthless perspective to go with your compassion.
Beautiful. A word about boundaries. Because boundaries are one of my favorite topics, and I'd love to hear your brilliance on it.
Well, my joke when I was doing psychotherapy group was I used to say, boundaries are us is the motto of group, like Toys R Us with the R. So it's boundaries
Yes.
are us. Yeah, that was our motto because I think boundaries are so essential. I'm actually about to give a talk on next week on boundaries for support professionals and how important it is. But boundaries are important in every relationship because it helps us understand the dynamics and gives us clarity about what is expected of us. So there's big differences, of course, between personal and professional relationships. Personal relationships are reciprocal, they're equal. Professional relationships usually have a one up, a one down. So when you have that one up, one down, that's a very different kind of thing because the person in the up position obviously has an influence on the person in the one down, and the person in the one down, has to be more careful in terms of the relationship. So we need to understand that boundaries help us understand what we should and shouldn't do in relationships and what is possible and what's available. And we also, in a personal relationship, need boundaries because as we're getting to know people, we don't want to be doing the oversharing early on, right? Boundaries mean when you first meet, you're at the chit chat level. Then you go into the getting to know you, talk about your past and your background and your family, then hopes and dreams and goals. And then, more intimate personal stuff, stories and experiences and feelings. So you have to go, if you start oversharing on the very first or second date, it's too much information. There's no context. There's no emotional trust or connection. So you're violating the other person's boundaries by oversharing. And I have seen with patients who come in, they said, I went on a date and this person told me all these intimate details about their life and I feel so uncomfortable. I said, of course you feel uncomfortable because it's inappropriate. They violated your boundaries by dumping all this intimate information on you that you shouldn't know yet. You shouldn't know these things because this is not a person that you're a friend with even. You've just gone on 2 dates. So boundaries are really important because we don't feel comfortable when our boundaries are violated or when we're violating other people's boundaries. And that feeling of ick, right? If we listen to it, if we trust it, we know, oh, there's a boundary violation going on here. And when right? And when they're not being violated, when we're paying, when we're respecting the boundaries and going into that intimacy gradually with context, we just stay comfortable and happy.
Well, and it's much easier to open.
Right? Absolutely.
How do you distinguish between a boundary and a rule?
I don't like rules per se, because I think if you have common sense, which I know these days is not so common, but if you have common sense and you have respect and courtesy and boundaries, you don't need rules, right? Like these rules, you should only have sex on X date, or
exactly.
You should call back at such and such a point, or like all those rules, they seem so random and arbitrary, and they don't take into consideration the two people involved and what's going on between them and how, how their thing is happening. Because I've seen people go very, very quickly into marriage and it worked out great. And I've also seen people go very, very slowly and it just fizzled out. So how fast you go, how quickly you go, all that stuff, you have to look at each person, each relationship. So rules to me are, that's what self-help books do. They give you, 10 rules for having successful relationships and follow these rules and everything will be good. It's like, one size fits all. And I've never ascribed to that theory. I don't think one size ever fits all. So to me, common sense, good boundaries, healthy communication, healthy confrontation, and respect. And with ruthless compassion, you can have healthy confrontation, by which I mean clear, precise, one issue at a time, so the other person doesn't get overwhelmed and confused, and then wait to see the response. And that response tells you a lot about the other person. So all of that is what helps having a healthy relationship, not rules to me.
Beautifully said. And it was occurring to me as you were speaking, and tell me if this lands as accurate to you. It was occurring to me that rules are something that are imposed from the outside, whereas boundaries really arise from the inside. Would that feel like an accurate description?
For sure. For sure.
And then in that way, the boundaries are always going to be about what's true between the two actual people in the actual room, right?
Exactly. As opposed to some random arbitrary one size fits all, which doesn't actually fit.
It doesn't actually work. Yeah. So
can I say a little bit more about healthy confrontation?
I would love to. That's exactly what I was going to ask you about.
Read each other's mind. Okay. Yeah. Because that's one of my favorite topics too, because I think that people have such a hard time saying something to another person that might be, taken the wrong way, that might be construed as offensive or not nice. And so I have some tools for healthy confrontation, which involve ruthless compassion, because ruthless compassion is about clarity and honesty, but also kindness. So the most important thing to understand is that if you're doing it right, then you can pretty much be assured that a bad response is not about the way you delivered the confrontation. So you don't make attacks. You don't go, you never do this, you always do that. Why can't you? You're so stupid. You're so mean. That doesn't work. You say, when you did X, I felt unhappy, sad, upset, confused, right? When you did Y, I got frustrated, disappointed, hurt. You don't attack. You make I feel statements about your behavior or what you said. And then you can even add, I would like it if you could do such and such instead. So when you leave the toilet seat up, when you go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and then I go into the bathroom at 4 a.m. and I fall into the toilet, I really feel, number one, shocked. But then the other thing is I feel disregarded, because you're not thinking about the other person in the house who's using the toilet. So could you please, in the future, be more conscientious and put the seat down, dear? And then you listen to their response, because what would be the appropriate response would be, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I don't want you falling into the toilet in the middle of the night. That's not nice. Of course, I will be more conscientious. Yes, I am a little foggy headed in the middle of the night, but I will work really hard to put the seat down so that you don't have any surprises. That should be the appropriate response. If the person says, I never leave the toilet seat up, you're imagining things. That's called gaslighting.
Gaslighting.
If they say, oh, you're so oversensitive, that's minimizing your experience. If they say, well, you did such and such, that I didn't like, that's changing the topic and not addressing the issue. That's avoiding. So there's a lot of bad responses, but the only appropriate response would be something that exhibited some consideration, some caring, some kindness, and a willingness to change the behavior that bothers you. It's not a big deal. But so if you deliver the message correctly, without attacking, without criticizing, but just saying, when you do this, this is how I feel, then you can be assured that their response is not about the way you delivered the message. It's about the way they are dealing with conflict. And if they cannot deal with your expressing your needs and your feelings, then you're not ever going to be able to negotiate in good faith with them. And so you're not going to have healthy confrontation, because they don't let it. So if you do it right, and they do it wrong, it's not about you, it's about them. If you do it wrong, then you don't know if it's about the way you delivered the message. So if you do it correctly with using ruthless compassion, you get information about them.
Thank you so much for outlining that. I love how concise and clear that is, and super actionable, and I want to really highlight the piece you said about the person also making an admission like, hey, I'm foggy headed. I can have every intention to put the seat down and I might forget sometimes. Right. And so it is a teamwork kind of thing, and patterns take a while to change. And so I think that's a spot where both people could have compassion for the other if they mess up,
Yeah, we're not looking for perfection. We're looking for an intention, and we're looking for caring. When you have healthy confrontation, you might not have everything go perfectly immediately, but if you know that the person acknowledges your feelings, acknowledges your needs, and is making their best effort to meet your needs, that's the best you can hope
that's
for.
it.
Yeah.
Now, if you come across a gaslighting or minimizing or
Avoiding,
proving a minor point, as Patrick says, like proving like some other point that's not the point that's actually being discussed, what do you do there? Like,
well,
do
then
you bring
say,
that to them?
yeah, you can say, hey, we're not talking about this other point. We can talk about that later. Right now, we're talking about the toilet seat. So can we stay on topic? And, you can say, like, it's very upsetting to me that you are denying my reality. My reality is that I fell, into the toilet this morning. And if, I know my experience, if you're telling me you never leave the toilet seat up, then we have a big problem, because that's my experience. And if they are, like trying to bully you or minimize your experience, you're too sensitive, you're denying my experience. I don't like falling into the toilet seat at 4 o'clock in the morning. It bothers me. And if you tell me I shouldn't be bothered, then I can't be myself with you, because I'm going to feel what I feel. And you can't tell me not to feel what I feel. If I feel upset, I'm going to be upset. You can't tell me I shouldn't, because then every other feeling I'm going to have, you're going to tell me I shouldn't feel too, so that doesn't work. So if that person can't like pedal back and go, you're right, I'm sorry, I'm being defensive, I'm being a jerk, I totally believe you. I didn't remember leaving it up, but I believe that you fell into the toilet. I believe that it bothers you. I'm sorry. I will make every effort. If they can pedal it back and acknowledge and apologize and promise to do better, you're good. But if they hold fast and continue to gaslight, continue to minimize your feeling, continue to try to divert to a different point, this is not a person that you can negotiate with. Therefore, this is not a person you can be in an intimate relationship with. This is not a person you can be in any kind of relationship with, really, because every relationship requires a certain amount of negotiation. And this person has just proven to you conclusively, because you've called them on their bad behavior. They've just proven to you that there's no negotiation possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is good information to have.
Disappointing, but Ruthless Compassion says better to be disappointed now than to waste 20 years on somebody who is fundamentally not suitable for you, and you're not going to be happy with them. Better to know sooner versus later.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So if a person wants to delve deeper into the Ruthless Compassion work, what's the best way to connect with you?
Everything is on my website, which is Marcia Sirota, MD, like medical doctor.com. And I have everything there. And they can, go and hang out with my blogs, my videos, my podcasts. It's all there. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I've linked to that website in the show notes. So if you're watching this or listening to this, or you're in the car and can't jot it down right now, get to the show notes later and you can find that link right there. Is there a final thought you'd like to leave folks with?
I think just, we all need to open our hearts more and open our minds more, because, these days, I think we're under so much stress that it makes us want to contract and, kind of clench in emotionally and also in terms of our awareness. But in difficult and stressful times, we need more of an open heart and more of an open mind, because the more conscious we are, the more empowered we are, and the more our hearts are open, the more connected we are. And that support is so necessary these days.
Oh, beautifully said. Thank you so much for this conversation. I really appreciate getting to talk with you.
My pleasure. I love this topic, and I love talking with you, because I think we're so much on the same plane.
We really are. Yeah, it's so great. So that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, until next time, a great relationship starts with you.